Today's message is a personal one. You see, I'm a mess. Paul Widmark is an absolute mess. I'm self-centered. I'm self-serving. I'm arrogant. I'm egotistical. I'm manipulative. And I'm less than truthful. I have not a clue why it is so hard to call myself a liar. But you see, Paul Widmark is an absolute mess without Jesus. Before Jesus, I tried to clean myself up and I tried to heal myself. It seemed like I was successful, but I could only keep up the effort for so long. I could fool those around me, but I couldn't fool myself. I grew weary. My defense would fall, and the old me would rise. I was defeated. I was without hope, and yet I would try to kill that part of me again and again and again. You see, the real me reeked. I was like rotting flesh. Sometimes I couldn't even stand the smell of my own life. I felt like an outcast. I wanted to be liked. Really, I wanted to be loved. I looked into the eyes of those around me to see if I was accepted. But you see, my life was caustic. I sucked the life out of others for my own use. People in their lives were just the canvas that I played my life against. I would try to do good, but there always seemed to be an underlying motive that left me feeling extremely dirty. When my life got quiet and I was honest, I didn't like myself. In fact, at times, I hated me. But what was there to do? When people seemed to care, I couldn't accept it. I was looking for their hidden agendas and for their ulterior motives. That was all I understood. And people couldn't be that different than me, could they? Yes, I am still a mess, but I'm not the mess that I used to be. You see, when I came to Jesus, I cried out for help. I said, Jesus, I am at the end of myself. I'm an outcast, wanting to be loved but not sure how or who to trust. My whole life I've heard about you, and the lives that have been miraculously touched I've seen. In fact, I've witnessed some of the miracles from a distance, and they've been real. There is much of my life that needs healing. Jesus, don't just heal me physically. I need to be healed on the inside as well. Jesus, if you are willing, I believe that you're able to heal me. That's what I said. Am I the only one who has said something like this? Let's go ahead and pray. Father, you say if I was the only one, you would have still sent Jesus. We have that much value. Oh, how I need Jesus. Father, I know my story is not unique. Even though our stories are different, they're all the same. Father, you created me. You created us. You loved us enough to send Jesus. The filth in my life doesn't scare you. I try to convince myself that I'm basically a good person, but when the real moments come, I'm left with myself. I know that my life stinks without you. Father, I thank you for the answer. I pray that today you would breathe life into my words. May they be yours. You have prepared me for this very moment, and I ask that your words would remain upon our heart, soul, and mind. Do your work in us. I know you're able. Amen. Today, I would like us to take a look at one of the most unique stories, I believe, in the entire Bible. It's no surprise that it involves Jesus. It was so powerful that the same story is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It directly confronts culture and presents Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah. A miracle is performed that the Jews understood that could only be performed by God himself. The passage is only 6 verses. When I was reading them in preparation for today, it was amazing, but I saw myself. And I won't be surprised if you see yourself in it as well. Let's go ahead and start out by reading Mark, the first chapter, verses 40 through 45 together. And a leper came to Jesus, beseeching him, and falling on his knees before him, saying, If you are willing, you can make me clean. Now, moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him and said, I am willing. Be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left and he was cleansed. And then he sternly warned him and immediately sent him away. He said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go. Show yourselves to the priests and offer your cleansing, what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and spread the news around, so much that to the extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city, but stayed out in the unpopulated areas. And they were coming to him from everywhere. Now, these are only 6 verses, but there's at least a half a dozen messages that could be preached out of this. It's that powerful. But we're going to focus primarily on one. And primarily we're going to focus on 4 verses. And do our best to be done in an hour. We don't have that much time, but we certainly can spend that much time here. What was going on? Here's Jesus, and a leper has fallen at his feet. This happens relatively in Jesus' ministry. Certainly in his first year. Mark takes us swiftly through the events which precede this encounter. Jesus is baptized with water, and the Holy Spirit comes down and rests upon him. He heals the sick. He casts out demons. He's calling men to follow him. Matthew, Mark, and Luke make a point to tell us that Jesus would get away to a secluded place just to talk to the Father. After one of those times, Simon found him, and Jesus said, let's go somewhere else so that I can preach, because that is what I came to do. People were flocking for the miracles, and Jesus came to preach the good news of the gospel, that he had come and that real life was available. The 3 Gospels give us a pretty good understanding of what was going on. Matthew speaks up and tells us that during this time Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. Luke tells us that the crowds were enormous. So we get the picture. People everywhere wanting miracles, and Jesus letting the disciples know that he came to preach the good news. But the crowd loved the miracles. When he preached the word, the religious leaders were critical, even to the point of trying to kill him. When Jesus performed miracles, the religious leaders found fault, and they were threatened. As we look at the interaction between Jesus and the leper, all 3 accounts show that the crowd was either silent or was not there. I found this really interesting. I believe that they weren't there at all. That would make sense, and here's the reason why. We have a leper that's come into the city, and when he sees Jesus, he calls out to him, falling at his feet. Now, this man is a leper, and the law is very clear where lepers must be, and that's outside the city. If anyone approached, he was to call out, unclean, unclean, and maintain a 50-step or 50-pace distance between himself and others. Leprosy was feared. It was a disease that bore shame as well. Leprosy was a visible example of the power of sin left unchecked in a person's life. When God gave the law to the Jews, leprosy took 2 complete chapters in the book of Leviticus. Leprosy was the cancer of the day, and there was no cure. The only cure was divine intervention by God. Naaman was the last person healed by this disease, and that was in the time of Elisha. Lepers were forbidden to enter the city, and they often lived by trash heaps because that's where they could find food. The only company they had was each other, and they were feared. And to touch a leper, even if you didn't contract the disease, caused you to become ritually unclean, ceremonially unclean. The only thing that was worse than touching a leper to a Jew was touching a dead person. Now, biblical leprosy included, but encompassed so much more than what we think of leprosy today. It included any malignant disease or skin disorder. Of course, it could be found on a person, but it was also considered to be mold or mildew, which could be found in a house, on cloth, or on leather. If it was found on a person, the person was cast out. If it was found on the cloth or on the leather, it was burnt. The stigma for a leper was one of living death. You know, what's funny is I read this, I've experienced that. It wasn't leprosy, but I experienced feeling like the living dead. But I wasn't able to define what the disease was. So we see this leper who has entered the city, found Jesus, fell at his feet, and begs him to listen. And he says, if you are willing, the Greek word here is thelio, and it means if you wish, if you want, if you desired to do this, I know that you are able. And able means that you're capable. You have the power to do this. So if you are willing, I know that you are able to make me clean. What's interesting is he didn't use the word for heal. He used the word for clean. It's a totally different word. The word that is used here doesn't just speak to the physical condition, but it speaks to the physical and to the spiritual condition. The word used was on the spiritual side. This leper had come to the end of himself. He had no other options. He's entered the city. He's fallen at the feet of the one that he knows that can heal. I've been there. Have you? I've had no other options but to call out to God. If you are willing, I know you are able. I have been this leper. But what Jesus does next is nothing but amazing. The man is on the ground before him. Jesus drops down to his feet, because that's where the man is. And it says that Jesus touched him. But the word goes so much further than the word of touching. It says that he adhered to him. He fastened himself to him. Jesus embraced this leper with all of his leprosy, like fire embraces wood. Jesus wasn't afraid of touching the leper's filth. He looked at him and he says, not only am I willing, I want to do this. And you're clean. And instantly the leprosy left. Luke says that the man was consumed with leprosy. It encompassed his entire body. Jesus fastened and adhered himself. And now he is clean. Unfortunately, I continue to see myself in this man who is not a leper now. This is a clean man. He's got life. He's got a new lease. And Jesus tells him, in fact, he commands him not to tell anybody about this healing. He tells him to present himself to the priests and offer what is necessary, as Moses commanded, to testify. Jesus was not bucking the law. In fact, he was instructing the man to submit to it. Amazing. Jesus' words were absolutely clear, but in his enthusiasm, the man could not shut up. I relate to this guy. Jesus has touched me? The leper. Why couldn't he shut up? Because he was dead. He was just waiting to die. But now he is clean. And now he's alive. Jesus says, I came that you and I may have life. Not just life, but to have it abundantly. Can you imagine what would happen if we actually got this message? What would happen if this message actually became real to us? What are the areas that we need to hear Jesus say, I am willing, be clean? What does it take for us to cry out to Jesus? He is not looking for us to clean up our life. He is not afraid of our mess. In fact, he's willing to embrace it and to remove it. You may not have physical leprosy. But what are the areas that are dead in our lives? What are the areas that are dead still in my life? Relationships, marriage, finances, anger, depression, being bound sexually to alcohol or drugs, emotional and depression, lost and confused. Our leprosy may be beneath the skin, but it's just as real and leaves us feeling like the walking dead. What is it that keeps us from quietly coming to Jesus in all of our mess with no hope other than God? What if we really understood that Jesus is there and what he is willing and capable to do? Can you imagine what that life would look like? What your life would look like? If you just came to Jesus and said, I know you're willing. Will you just heal Make me clean. Jesus is willing and able. It doesn't matter what the mess is. We just need to experience his embrace. Hear his words. I am willing and I am able. Be clean.